Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we get going, I'll just do a very quick introduction to those of you who don't know me. I'm Sharon Wald, and I'm a certified functional medicine health coach. Okay, quite a mouthful there. And if you're confused about the term functional medicine, don't be. Functional medicine is an approach or a way of addressing illness by focusing on identifying and treating the causes of the illness and not just the symptoms. Because, as we're probably all aware, just by treating the symptoms, while it might bring temporary relief, it's never going to resolve the underlying problem. And of course, a big part of achieving optimal health or good health is having a well-functioning immune system, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So let's get going. First thing, what's the immune system? It's been in the news, obviously, an awful lot for the past couple of months. So let's go into a little bit of a basic overview, not so much that your eyes are going to glaze over, but just to get an understanding of what's involved. Okay, so basically the immune system, it's a complex network of cells and organs that defend the body against infection. Okay, so far so good. Now, we have a number of different parts to the immune system, and I'm just going to show you a little bit of a diagram that's going to outline some of the main parts. So one of the first things that we need to talk about are the white blood cells, and those are produced in the bone marrow, so right here. The next really important part of the immune system are antibodies. Now, these are the proteins that are produced to counteract a specific antigen or a specific toxin. Next, we have what's known as the complement system or the complement cascade, and it's a part of the immune system that enhances or complements the ability of antibodies and white blood cells to clear the microbes and all the bad stuff, promote inflammation, and then attack the pathogen cell membrane, because it's only by attacking the membrane that you can destroy the toxin or antigen. Now, the next part of the system is the lymphatic system, and it's a network of tissues and organs that help rid the body of toxins and waste products and any other unwanted material. Its main function is to transport lymph. Now, lymph is a fluid that contains the white blood cells, and it transports it throughout the body so they can attack wherever they're needed. So we can see here in the diagram, we've got things like the lymphatic vessels that are located in the neck region and also in the groin and the leg region, and also lymph nodes. So this is part of the collection points here. So that's in around the armpit and also in the groin area. Now, the next organ we want to talk about is the spleen. And the spleen is the largest organ of the immune system, and it acts as a filter for the blood. So old red blood cells are recycled in the spleen, and platelets and white blood cells are stored there. Sorry, I was just distracted a little bit because we've had some new people join in, and I just want to thank you very much for coming in. Just as a little bit of an aside here before I get back into my discussion of the immune system, what I've done is I've muted everybody on the way in, and what I'm going to do is after I finish the discussion part of the webinar here, what I'll do is I'll stop the recording and unmute everybody and open up things for questions. So if you've got questions, write them down and we'll go from there. Okay, now I'm just going to go back into what the major parts of the immune system are here, so bear with me. Now, another part of the immune system is the bone marrow. And the bone marrow is that spongy tissue that's inside some of our bigger bones. And the important thing here is that the bone marrow contains stem cells. And the stem cells can develop or differentiate into different fighting parts for the immune system. So they can develop into red blood cells that carry oxygen throughout the body. They can also produce white blood cells that, of course, fight the infections, and also platelets that help with blood clotting. Now, one of the last organs that we're going to talk about briefly here is the thymus. The thymus is located right here. Now, it's a specialized, what they call a primary lymphoid organ. And within the thymus, T cells mature. So T cells are a type of lymphocyte. So as we know that lymphocytes are created a lot of times in the bone marrow, and they act to destroy infected cells, but they actually mature in the thymus. Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot going on here. It's quite a comprehensive system. And with any complex system, how well it works is determined by the healthiness or the efficacy of each component, and then how it interacts with all the other components. Now, with a lot of our body systems, we can tell when it's working right. Okay, so you can feel and hear the beating of your heart, so that you know that your cardiovascular system is probably operating okay. And the same with your breathing. You can feel the depth of your breath and the rapidity of your breath, so you can tell when it's working well. But with the immune system, it's a little bit different, because for most intents and purposes, it's silent. But even though we're much less aware of our immune system, it's working 24/7, protecting us from thousands of potentially deadly attacks from environmental organisms that we're exposed to every day. And as we noted previously, there's a number of different parts to our immune system, and they can be classified as either first or second lines of defense. So let's go into a little bit more detail about these different lines of defense here. Okay, so our first line of defense is known as innate immunity. And probably what you can tell from the name, it means that it is a range of protective mechanisms that we're all born with. Now, it provides non-specific protection against the various pathogens such as viruses, bacteria, fungus, parasites, and etc. It's our oldest system, and it acts as a rapid response. So we get an immediate response with hopefully controlled inflammation. And the important thing about this is that it requires no prior exposure to that particular antigen. So the innate system is made up of a non-specific part, which includes physical barriers such as the skin, chemical barriers such as antimicrobial proteins that also known to harm or destroy invaders. But it also has a part that's more broadly specific. And these are things like special white blood cells such as neutrophils and macrophages. So they know when a molecule shouldn't be there, and they're going to attack very fast. And that's usually within 3 or 4 days of confronting the threat. Okay, let's delve a little deeper into the defense mechanisms of this innate immunity. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about are protective barriers. Now, the first organ of our innate system is our skin. Okay, it's our largest organ. And as you know, it's made from layers of cell that serves as a protective barrier to infection. But not only does the skin provide a protective barrier to keeping invaders out, it also secretes antimicrobial peptides that actively work against pathogens. And some recent research has also highlighted the importance of some of the beneficial bacteria that lives on our skin. So it has created its own microbiome on our skin. And those bacteria produce their own antimicrobial peptides. So those act to actually keep in check other less beneficial bacteria. So I guess the take-home message here is that having healthy, intact skin is a really important part of our immune system. Now, the second part of a protective barrier is more internally, and those are the mucous membrane linings of the respiratory, our gastrointestinal, and our genitourinary tracts. and they provide a protective barrier cells that are fortunately constantly being renewed when given the appropriate and necessary building blocks to keep them going. Now, what happens is that these mucous membranes trap small particles to prevent them from attaching to cells, and then another mechanism will expel them. Okay, so we know this happens every day in our lives. So the mucous membrane that you have, let's say, in your sinuses or in your nose or in your mouth, that it's going to trap that along the mucous membrane and also the hairs in your nostril. And then you're going to either sneeze or you're going to cough to expel them. And pretty much the same thing happens in our gastrointestinal tract. We have got a mucous membrane that goes basically all through it, and it's going to catch any of the toxins or organisms that shouldn't be there and prevents them from actually passing through our gut lining and into our bloodstream. And that renews quite often. In fact, there can be actually liters of that mucous membrane that sheds every day, and of course it's evacuated through the colon and out. So I must think that's pretty miraculous there. Now, another very crucial aspect of innate immunity are what we call the chemical barriers to infection. So when microbes penetrate the body's protective barriers and enter the internal tissues, they can encounter a variety of chemical substances that are going to attempt to prevent their growth and proliferation. Now, there are many mechanisms in cells by which the chemicals work to harm or destroy invaders. And honestly, you can spend a very long time getting into the details, which we're not going to go into today. It's just beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about. But I did want to show you just a brief picture, and hopefully you're not going to get totally freaked out about this, but it's just a little diagram of our innate immunity. So that is our first level of response right here. So that's a rapid response. And these are some of the organisms inside that actually work to help us. Okay, so they are different types of white blood cells. Now, on the other side is the second line of defense, which I'll get into in just a few minutes. Okay. Now, so what is the response from our white blood cells? Well, the early and induced response is what we call the final process of innate immunity. Now, many of you are familiar with this response, but may have only heard of it because of the dangers that it can pose if it's not controlled. And of course, the response is inflammation. Now, inflammation eliminates infection or holds it in check until specific or acquired, which is our second line of response, actually kicks in. Now, any infection often results in tissue damage, which then triggers an inflammatory response. And as you're probably well aware, the signs of inflammation include pain, swelling, redness, and fever, which are all induced by the chemicals released by the macrophages, or this particular type of white blood cell. It's important to realize that inflammation, it's a healthy, protective immune response. And in fact, we wouldn't last very long without it. However, when chronic inflammation exists in the body, if we've got no way of shutting it down, it can become a problem and chronic disease can develop from that. Okay, let's go on to our second line of defense, and that's acquired immunity. And acquired is named because you're not born with this form of immunity. It's acquired through exposure to different pathogens. So this line of defense is acquired from an exposure to an infection or a disease, or to another person's antibodies, as in vaccine. And it's well established that persons who contract certain diseases and survive generally don't catch those illnesses again. Now, this isn't always the case, but the process is made possible through the mechanisms of acquired immunity. So when your immune system is exposed to a pathogen, it learns to recognize it, and it can make your immune system better equipped to fight off that type of germ the next time you're exposed to it. So it's dependent on specialized white blood cells known as lymphocytes. And lymphocytes are the cells that are responsible for the body's ability to distinguish and react to an almost infinite number of foreign substances. And lymphocytes, you can see, is kind of a little generated picture of it here. Lymphocytes originate from the stem cells in the bone marrow, and they can travel and multiply in response to appropriate stimulations anywhere throughout the body. And of course, the appropriate stimulation would be an exposure to something that the body doesn't recognize as something that should be there. Now, you might have heard the terms T cells or B cells, and they refer to different types of lymphocytes. Now, both the T and the B cells recognize and help eliminate foreign molecules, but they do so in different ways. Okay, I'm just going to bring up that diagram again, just because it really does show a little bit more. So on the right-hand side, we have adaptive immunity. So again, that's the slower response. So that kicks in after our innate immunity has been working for a few days. And we see our B cells and our T cells here. I'm certainly not going to go into the mechanisms involved here because that is whole lots of biochemistry involved there. But one of the interesting things that I wanted to note here was the overlap between the two systems. And what this is implying is that it's actually our non-specific part of, our broadly specific part of the innate immunity or innate response actually helps train our adaptive immunity. Okay, so hopefully sometimes pictures help us to retain a little bit more here. Okay, so I will go on. Now, the lymphocytes are distinguished from other cells by their capacity to recognize foreign molecules by means of receptor molecules. Okay, so these receptor molecules cover the whole cell membrane of all of our cells. It's a special protein whose shape is designed to fit foreign molecules. So you can think of these molecules as a key that fits into a lock. And in fact, almost all of our cells in the body have receptor molecules because that's the process that moves material into and out of cells. So any foreign material that binds specifically to a receptor molecule is called an antigen. And antigens include molecules found on invading microorganisms such as viruses, bacteria, parasites, and fungi, as well as molecules located on the surface of foreign substances such as pollen, dust, or even transplanted material. And certain antigens can induce an immune response when they bind to that receptor molecule. So this is actually the important part, and this is where a lot of the research goes into stopping the proliferation of a virus. And that is, if you can stop how they bind or stop their binding onto a receptor molecule, you can usually stop it from replicating. Now, one of the many incredible abilities of the immune system is that it keeps a record of every microbe it's ever defeated. And this enables the immune system to recognize and destroy the microbe quickly if it enters the body again before it can multiply and make you sick. However, there's some infections like the flu and the common cold. Well, we have to fight those many times because there's so many different viruses, so many strains or mutations that it's keeping a record of one strain and we'll fight that strain, but then a different one comes up. So we have to build up our resistance to that yet again. So I guess the take home there is that catching a cold or the flu from one virus is not going to give you immunity against others because it is really that specific. But record keeping is how we acquire immunity through vaccinations. Now, the immune system is triggered by a small amount of an illness to produce antibodies, and it's just enough to trigger the antibody um, growth. And this enables the body to quickly launch an immune attack to kill off the virus for future exposure. Now, what we're exposed to dictates our acquired immunity. Now, for example, where we live, any vaccinations that we've had, let's say at birth or when we're younger or as we get older, and our exposure to different environmental conditions all impact our ability to fight off various diseases. So if you've ever experienced allergies when visiting someplace for the first time, this is due to the exposure of something novel to your system, something that you're not already familiar with. And hopefully the next time you visit, you may not have the same reaction, for which you can thank acquired immunity. And because we're all exposed to different pathogens, we all have unique immune defenses. And this means that our immune systems and how well they work actually is going to vary from person to person. And while we all have similar innate responses, such as our skin barrier, our acquired immunity can be vastly different. In fact, recent studies have shown that our history and our environment, like where and with whom we live, can be responsible for 60 to 80% of the differences between our individual immune system. And other factors can include our health history and also our genetic background. So this is really important. It emphasizes the individuality of our immune system. So some of the things that are going to work for some people are actually not going to work as well for others, and this is important to keep in mind. Now, we can have an overactive immune system that can result in a number of conditions, including allergies and autoimmune diseases. So an allergic disease includes allergies or sensitivities to foods, medications, stinging insects, anaphylaxis, hay fever, sinus infections, asthma, hives, dermatitis, eczema, and there's probably heaps more. Now, these conditions result when the immune system makes an overly strong response to the allergens. Now, moving on from that, we have autoimmune diseases that can include disorders like multiple sclerosis, autoimmune thyroid disease like Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, type 1 diabetes, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, systematic vasculitis, and others. Now, when the immune system mounts a response against the normal components of the body, so this is our normal tissue, an autoimmune disease is to blame. And understanding this is absolutely key in treating these disorders, because you need to identify what's triggering the immune system that's acting against its own tissue. So again, treating the symptoms might give you a little bit of initial and rapid relief or short-term relief, but particularly in the case of autoimmune conditions, if you don't act to figure out what's triggering it and eliminate that, the disorder is only going to proliferate. It's only going to progress. And the unfortunate thing is, with an autoimmune condition, if you've already got one, you stand a 30% chance of acquiring yet another one. Okay, so again, focusing on the immune system is really important there. Now, on the other hand, we can also have an underactive immune system, and it's known as immunodeficiency. And that means it's not functioning correctly, and it makes people vulnerable to infections because it can't mount an appropriate defense. And it can actually be life-threatening in severe cases. Now, immunodeficiency can be inherited, and it includes conditions such as CVID, which is a common variable immunodeficiency, or X-linked, severe combined immunodeficiency, which is SCID, and also complement deficiencies. Now, they can arise as a result of medical treatment or be caused by another disease such HIV or AIDS, and also by certain types of cancer. But it can also be caused by not providing the different components of the immune system. So if you recall back to that diagram, all the number of different organs and their interactions, if you don't supply them with the nutrients or the building blocks that they need to repair, maintain, and replenish. Okay, so this is probably the reason that you're all here today. You want to know what you can do. So we have a more in-depth understanding of the immune system and how it works. So how can you strengthen it? Well, the ability to boost our immune function is complex and it's continually under study. And this is due to the fact that it's a system and it requires balance and harmony among its parts. And so the interconnectedness of the immune system is very complex. So let's look at the effects of lifestyle. Okay, so we look at some of the tips here. Now, unfortunately, there's no magic wand or there's no superfood that's going to immediately ensure a well-functioning immune system. The most important thing that you can do is live a healthy lifestyle. Now, I know that some people will find that just a little bit disappointing, but it's actually the simplest, not necessarily the easiest, but it is the simplest way to improve your immune system. So not only will your immune system benefit, but every other part of your body functions better by following the following tips. So some of these I'm going to list here, are fairly obvious. So the first one, don't smoke, because you are directly ingesting all kinds of toxins into your body, into your respiratory system, so that your immune system is going to be constantly on the alert there. Next thing, eat a diet high in fruits and vegetables. Now, the fruits and vegetables, because of the phytonutrients that they have in there, all of the nutritionists are the building blocks that we need to maintain all of our systems and organs. Exercise regularly. Now, you don't need to be a gym bunny, you don't need to be running marathons or anything like that, but exercising regularly 3 or 4 times a week, moderate exercise. If you drink alcohol, drink only in moderation. Again, alcohol, like a number of other things, actually can be considered a toxin. And in order to improve your immune system, you actually want to bring down your toxic load. Next, get adequate sleep. And by adequate, I mean enough and good quality. And other things, as we've been focusing on over the past couple of months, is washing your hands frequently and washing them properly. And probably the best thing is to stay away from people or maintain your distance from people who have overt signs of being sick or coughing or sneezing or basically spreading. Now, it's well established that people who are malnourished are more vulnerable to infectious diseases, and this includes the elderly, only because they tend to eat less and often have less variety in their diets. Now, unfortunately, malnourishment or undernourishment is really common, even in countries with a secure food supply, mostly because many of us are choosing to eat crap food over nutritious whole food. But also there's mounting evidence that our food is losing some of its nutrition through either modern farming practices or degrading soil conditions, and there are a whole heap of other issues involved there. So we can be experiencing micronutrient deficiencies. Now, for example, deficiencies of zinc, selenium, iron, copper, folic acid. Actually, I should say, instead of folic acid, I should say folate. They are 2 different things. And vitamins A, B6, C, and vitamin E. All of these are absolutely necessary for our immune system to respond. Many people don't realize that our food is more than just nutrients, and it's certainly more than its calorie content or its energy content. It also acts as information for our DNA. Now, remember earlier I mentioned that our genetic background actually is responsible for some of our immune system efficacy. Well, our DNA acts as an operating manual for our body. But what we've discovered over the past 20 or 30 years is that while our physical strands of DNA, so just the physicality, the physiology there is static, how they're expressed to the body is dynamic. Now, most of our DNA have tags or markers that act as on-off switches to expression. So what controls these switches? Well, that's the study of epigenetics. And research has shown that the food we eat can have positive or negative effects by turning on or turning off these switches. So not surprisingly, many whole foods have a positive effect. Now, if you suspect your diet is not providing you with all of your micronutrient needs, you might consider taking a quality supplement. Now, normally I always try to encourage my clients to better their eating practices by introducing more whole foods and eliminating some of the foods that can be a real problem, such as trans fats or bad fats, sugars, and so on. But I know for many people that sometimes there can be real blockages to improving your food, so that a supplement can be useful. Now, the important thing about that is that you need to take a quality supplement. And I suggest that you avoid buying your supplements from the grocery store because they're generally really poor quality. And if you're interested in finding out more about what a good quality supplement is, well, just get in touch with me and I can send you basically a guideline for that. Okay. Now, next, and I know that this was probably the last thing I mentioned, but especially and increasingly today, stress is really common and it really impacts our immune system. You know, we've got busy schedules, and while our social calendars may not be packed at the moment, we can anticipate that soon they will be. But we've got a number of other stresses, such as financial burdens and anxiety about, you know, what's going to happen in the future. How are our families going to cope? And all of that can contribute to chronic stress. Now, stress by itself is actually a good thing when it helps in certain situations. So I want to differentiate between occasional stress that actually can help perk us up. It's part of the fight or flight situation, from chronic stress, which is continually there. So when we experience chronic stress, hormones are released into the body. Again, helpful when we're in danger and need to flee to safety, or even you need that quick little alertness level. Let's say, well, if you're going to be giving a webinar, a little bit of stress. But when you're under constant stress, the hormones remain present throughout the day and they affect the function of all of our body systems. And one in particular, oops, let me go back here. One in particular is our digestive system. So basically the hormone cortisol, which is one of our stress hormones, can actually start to shut down our digestive system. Because if you're in a situation of fight or flight, digestion is not going to be the first thing on your mind. Okay? Now, unfortunately, when you shut down the digestive system for a period of time, you're not going to get the nutrition that you need in order for all of the systems to work properly. And over time, things are going to degrade. And that includes our immune system. Okay. Now, I've got a number of resources here. Now, they are right on this slide. Now, granted, this is going to be hard to read and you're not going to be able to really look at it here, but this is recorded and I will be sending the recording, and I can probably send this in a PDF so that if you do want to check out some of the things I've talked about, it's going to be there. Now, I just wanted to, before we go on to questions, first off, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out to join me. The whole topic of immunity is actually vital to the health, and the more that we know about it, the better equipped we're able to defend ourselves from disease. Now, I'm going to open this up for questions, but first, if you have even more questions that you would prefer to talk to me privately about, or if you've just got some questions about your health, you don't know where to go next or what the first steps are, then please, you can book a call with me. We can talk for 15 or 20 minutes. And if I can help you, I will try and guide you where the next steps are. If I can't help you, I probably know someone that can. So you can contact me through my website, Healthy Living with Dr. Sharon. There's a contact page there. Or you can email me. Or you can actually go onto my Facebook page, which is Hashimoto Living with Dr. Sharon, and message me there. So there are a number of ways you can get in touch with me, or just through email. Okay, so we've had a lot of information here. I've touched pretty lightly on this, and what I'm going to do now is, if you've got questions, what I'm going to do is stop the recording and stop my screen share, and